how this works?
And we have to continue to say that we're happy. There we are.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm assuming because you asked me to do it that you're happy.
we're happy. Yes.
Right. Okay. Apologise in advance if a cat wanders by. She's given me a look, so hope nobody's phobic.
No, I like cats. No.
Good. So I'm just making sure I've got all of the bits I need on the other screen. So what are we going to do today? Last time, of course, we looked at what it is to be a trustee, and we looked at the essential trustee and what is good governance. And chief amongst that was very much around managing risk, managing the processes and procedures of your organisation. And so what I set you for homework was to think about the risks that pertain specifically to you. And so what I'm going to do today is to follow that up by giving you a talk on the mandatory policies, the things that come alongside some of the biggest risks and the most generic risks for organisations. So I'll do that talk, and then what I want to do is to break it down as it pertains to the Living Tree, and basically to think about the risk assessment that you've done, and then say, well, okay, what policies and procedures do we need in place? Obviously, you'll have quite a lot of this. This is, again, like we did last time, working from first principles, building it up and thinking it through. Then I'm going to do another little talk on actual implementation of procedures. Because even if you're just updating something, it is important to go through all the steps. And we'll be looking at what those steps are and why. And then finally, today, I'd like to go into the detail of how you are going to implement the policies and procedures, and effectively help you to come up with an action plan out of today.
Brilliant.
And because it's recorded, you won't be able to wriggle out of it. Not that anybody ever does, but you'll have it all recorded, all the next steps you're going to take. So please feel free, I know I said this last time, but I will say it again, please feel free to ask questions at any point, whether I'm presenting or wittering on generally. I know you will, having met you. So just chip in. Once I'm presenting, I won't necessarily be able to see you, so give me a yell.
Okay.
So let's have a quick look at the, find it. What have I done with that? Homework. I think I closed it. Sorry. Sorry. I will just find that. There we go. Okay. Best laid plans. Good. Right. Okay, so the homework was, I'll just share my screen. Sorry. No. So the homework I asked you to do looked a bit like this. Do you like your logo, by the way?
Yeah.
So this was the first part. It was a two-parter. And you'll remember I went through last time the different types of risk, that the Charity Commission identified. I asked you to pop the risks you came up with in these 5 areas, just really for convenience sake. And I did send you a template which I'd worked through in the past. So I'd be interested to hear what you've come up with for these areas.
Okay. Shall I go first? I mean,
Go, Jo.
we've all done these sort of we haven't sort of sat down together and looked at these because we've all been sort of in different places at different times. So I've sort of sat and I've sort of thought of 1 or 2 under each heading. I know there'll be many more. This was just a starting point for discussion, really. But so under governance, something I'm very aware of is, you know, we touched on it last time, was just the kind of difficulties with succession planning and recruitment of trustees. And I thought the likelihood of that, I gave that a 2, and I thought the impact was a 3. So that gives it a 6 altogether. Under operational, again, similar, but I thought one of the things that we're always trying to do, and something that we definitely talked about last time, was how we should be delegating a lot more, and all the operational side of things should be delegated so that we can focus more on strategy. And so we've got some volunteers, but I've put here under operational, one risk is having too few volunteers to delegate to. And the likelihood of that was 2, and the impact would be a 3. I've put the allotment being vulnerable to damage, and I've put the likelihood of that as a 2, impact as a 3. This is specifically because we now have a greenhouse and a shed there, which are in quite a space which is quite open to people walking nearby and seeing them. And then thirdly, I also put under operational, I put insufficient training in the meet and greet. So when we have any get together, whether it's on a Friday afternoon at our regular meeting place, or whether it's people turning up unexpectedly to the allotment or to a swimming activity or anything, it's about trying to make sure that there's sufficient numbers who can meet and greet and have got the an information pack available to give to anybody new. And we're still in the process of putting a greeting pack together, an information pack together, but we have had 1 session of meet and greet training with Macmillan 2 years ago, but we then found out that wouldn't be an ongoing thing. So we're very aware that we want to train up more members, and so the likelihood I've put that for that is another 2, impact I gave it a 3. Under financial, I put poor record. I mean, I think I was partly looking at the sample that you gave us. And that is a very good example, because we only discussed it. We had a budget meeting last week. Since we've last seen you, we've had a budget meeting. And one of the things that we're often aware of is when donations are made for the treasurer, making sure that they're properly recorded and that the money is counted properly by 2 people, and that so it's kind of, you know, you've got to, it's all the sort of security around that. So I've put that down as a financial risk, and I've put likelihood 2, impact 3. Inadequate insurance for the allotment. This is again another very topical issue, because the greenhouse has just been built, and it was actually a pane of glass was blown away in the storm, and we haven't actually got it on our insurance policy, because it would have meant changing to a completely different type of insurance policy, which would have been a lot more expensive. So we, for the time being at least, have decided that we won't insure the greenhouse, and that we'll just, hopefully it will survive anything that the weather throws at it in the next few years, and it will come to be a good investment. So for the time being, we haven't insured it. So I thought likelihood of that is 3, but the impact is 2, because as a group of trustees, we feel that that is a financial cost that we can probably offset if we need to. So I put that there. Under external, I put we've got no control over whether our numbers eventually grow too large for our current venue where we meet on a Friday afternoon. And over the years, they are slowly growing. At some point, we might become too big to meet in that particular space. What do we do at that point? I've put likelihood 2, but I've put impact 3, because it, you know, it could be devastating. We wouldn't know where to go next. What other venue we could use. I think I've given most things a 2 and a 3. And the last one, I've under compliance, I've put the trustees ourselves having a poor knowledge of our responsibilities and legal requirements. So again, I put likelihood 2, or actually maybe a 1, because we are trying very hard to read around the subject, and impact 3. So I think I've probably given everything a 6. I was thinking of things that would be quite important. I decided I just focus. So that's as far as I've got. But
just one point on that: the numbers growing and the problems with venue, that's an operational risk rather than
okay. That I did wonder. That's fine. Okay, that's operational.
The external risks would be something like you know that the person or company that owns the venue might sell it in the next 5 years.
Oh, right. Okay.
Going to happen, then you have no control over
that. Okay, fair enough.
So
okay.
You cover with your pest analysis. I think we touched on that last time. So what about somebody else? Carol, do you want to go? Or?
Yeah, I had a little look at it from my area of responsibility. I run and manage the therapy partnership, which is where we not enroll, but we have a list of volunteer therapists, local therapists who provide treatment at a discount for our members. And then we issue our members with a card that allows them 6 treatments that we pay for them, Living Tree pays for. We do keep, so we don't just take any old therapist. We do look at all their documentation and make sure that we record that and make sure they're insured and that they're registered with a governing body of some sorts. But one of my thoughts around that was, well, one, clearly the whole thing probably needs a policy to outline all of that. But one of the risks, I thought, is somebody having a bad or a negative experience with one of the therapists that they visited that we've supported and paid for them. And feeding that back.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure how to score it, impact and likelihood, so I sort of gone 1-2, 1-2. But I guess it could be a 2 because it's reputation that it could potentially affect of the organisation.
You're also into safeguarding territory, so the impact might be up to a 3 if you went really bad. So yes. So then in some ways, where there are with a lot of risks, there's 2 possible outcomes or 2 possible things you need to consider. One is the reputational risk of the scheme, and the second one might be a safeguarding concern through that relationship. So you can break it down in that sort of way. So you're absolutely right. So any others you've got, Carol?
No, that was as far as I've got so far.
That's all the way. So lastly, but by no means leastly.
Hi there. Yes, well, some of my points actually are similar to Joe's. Under governance, I've put loss of trustees resigning.
You're on mute, Diane. For some reason, you're mute, Diane. Diane, we can't hear you for some reason. What's happened to her? She can't hear us either. Diane, what's happened? Something weird's happened. Can she not hear us?
Well, she's
Diane. She's full flow. What's going on? Diane, look at the camera. Diane.
We can't hear you, Diane.
we can't see her either.
The camera. I can hear her, but she's not.
I can see her.
I can't hear you. We can't hear any of that. She's just seen your message. Can't hear you. No. What's happened? Connecting to audio. Try. We could see message. We could see you. Yeah. Should I? Can you try talking now, Diane? Is she still trying? What's happened?
We lost her.
Into audio. No, unless it's just the volume. Maybe.
But she went suddenly, didn't she? Mid-sentence.
Is it a volume thing? No. No. That's
Can
what
you
it-
hear us?
Can you hear us? Let's ask her. Can you hear us? Can you
She
hear us?
might not, she might not know how to message.
It might be a bit difficult. She's using an Asus pad. It's different than a PC.
Right.
Oh, she can hear.
I
sorry.
can hear.
Okay. Does she hear us?
Yeah,
Oh, there.
yeah, I can.
Heard you then.
You're back.
You're back. I heard you then.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
You can, yes.
Do you know, I don't even know what I did.
But now we can hear you. So we heard the beginning. We heard you say about the loss of trustees and people retiring,
Yeah.
and it just went quiet. It was like something suddenly stopped connecting.
How
But you
weird.
looked as if you were making really excellent points. So
Yeah, and we were dying to know what you were saying.
Okay, so yes, my thoughts were about possibly losing trustees. Then operational points, I put about not having enough volunteers. And in particular, my thought was both with trustees and volunteers that you get people who are happy to do a certain amount, but if numbers fall and the remaining people are asked to do even more, that can be an issue. I mean, you know, just digressing slightly, but you know, that's true of me in my workplace as well, and I think it you know, can apply just as much. So it's asking people to do the amount that they feel they can do, but not feeling you have to ask them to do more. Just briefly, financial, I guess this is financial, but I wondered about sort of injuries and sort of culpability during particular activities like the amblers. External, I put here possibly about COVID, something that we can't help, that we may yet not be at the end of. And then for compliance and legal, I again put about ongoing COVID legislation possibly and complying with that. So yeah, so those were my thoughts.
Oh, excellent. So between you've done a really good job of identifying the issues for your organisation. So what we're going to do is that I'm not actually going to do the bottom half of this yet. I want to talk a little bit more about the specific issues before we come back, and we'll do that analysis about looking at the ones that are scoring highly and what you're going to do about those. So if it's okay with you, what I'm going to do now is, if I can find the blasted things, there we go, is to look at the mandatory policies. Just resize this. Right, can you now see the slide and only the slide?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. This is one of our academy pieces, and it falls under operations management, although policies in many ways go across quite a lot of different areas, but we put them in operations management. What I'm going to look at is oh crumbs, taking a risk-based approach, apparently. Say,
Yeah.
I'm not being esoteric there. I don't know why this. It was fine when I left it. I don't know why this has got mixed about. Right, so what are policies and procedures? Define our terms first of all, and unsurprisingly, given that what we've just been discussing, I want to look at taking a risk-based approach, and I want to look at what the must-have policies are and why they're the must-have ones, and then we're going to stop and look, apply that to what we've just been talking about, and then we're going to look at the steps for implementing. Okay. So the way I'm using this is that a policy is a statement of how you view an issue. So that might be, we believe that safeguarding is an important part of our work because we're working with vulnerable people, or confidentiality is important because we work with medical details that people would not want known, or something. And usually, but not exclusively, those that are then followed on by the practical steps of exactly how you're going to put that into place. They don't need to be in the same document. And in fact, there's some argument for having them in separate documents, but usually they're in the same document, but they are different, substantially different things. Protocols are sort of more generic. That would be things like consent forms, which go across a number of activities. And a sort of just good practice-y sort of things. And plans, of course, are different again. It was a term somebody came up with last time I was talking to somebody about this. And it was, I couldn't tell where it fitted. But anyway, if I remember it, I'll come back to you. So, why do charities need policies? By which I mean policies and procedures. An NCVO, which is a very useful organisation if you haven't come across it, says this. So it ensures that you are complying with the law, which you touched on, and it gives you a framework for delegation, something else that is important for you, because it not only gives the top line of what you're trying to achieve, but it gives the detail of what you're trying to achieve. So if you've got a procedure for meeting and greeting in a policy, as you said earlier, then that's going to make it much, much easier to delegate to those individuals that activity. But you'll still have control because you have that procedure in hand, and you review it and you keep an eye on it. You may also have work product come back, because part of your procedure may be that the designated team leader each week feeds back on any successes or challenges for that activity or something like that. Transparency and accountability. The policies and the policy position of the organisation, and we'll look at this in a bit more detail, can very well be public, and possibly should be public, because they will follow on from your mission, they will follow on from what you do, and having them on your website or publicly available would not be a bad thing, but your procedures, you probably wouldn't, if only because some of them might have named individuals, they may have perhaps more detail than you would want the public to know. And above all, the greatest of these is that they limit risk. And that is why we call it a risk-based approach. And just to drive that really home, this is from the Charity Commission. You must, as trustees, keep an eye on all of your policies and make sure that they're fit for purpose. And we'll come back to this again later, because having a regular process of checking, as if you didn't have enough to do already, is a very wise thing. And there are some tweaks that can help with that. And this is particularly important where statutory guidance might change, protocols in medical protocols or safeguarding protocols or whatever. You must keep accurate records. And we touched on the external forces, and it could be that social trends or IT trends, such as recording meetings like this, actually mean that your policies and procedures need updating. So we had a fairly informal, because this is a private meeting, we had an informal consent process. But it could be that now you're having more Zoom meetings, possibly therapeutic Zoom meetings are going on. Actually, you need to update your policies or your procedures. And you need to make sure that they're working, that people are complying with them, and that they are still in as good practice. So that's that. We've mentioned this, the types of risk, and you'll remember this from last time. So this is, what this says is that there are some things, as you've identified in the homework, things like safeguarding, health and safety. Somebody mentioned the injuries and culpability. And particularly GDPR, where you're holding sensitive information about people's health. The impact of a breach is almost always red. And as we talked about last time, the amber and the red risks, the one you as trustees really need to ensure are managed. So this is why I use the term mandatory, because they are always risks. So you, unless you're a very unusual trustee board, they are the ones that you're going to have to keep an eye on. So organisational risk assessments and mitigation plans, actually having one of those, doing one of those, as we discussed last time, is always a good idea. The main ones are these: GDPR and data protection. The legislation, although it may change over the next couple of years, is still requires you as an organisation to have thought through how you keep information, how you collect it, how you dispose of it, who sees it, where it's kept, is it on paper or electronically, and to have safeguards for all of that, particularly if it's particularly sensitive or the individuals you're working with are particularly vulnerable, in which case you need to do a DPIA assessment, which goes really into depth about how you keep information. Safeguarding is the other one. Almost everybody, almost all groups are working with people who, if they're not automatically vulnerable, like young children, are people who may sometimes be vulnerable by virtue of mental health or physical health or circumstance. And so having, and similarly, you might work with volunteers who have vulnerabilities, or could potentially be vulnerable at some times. So having a safeguarding policy, having procedures that everybody knows about, and they're in your greeting pack, not only about what you as an organisation do, but what individuals need to do if somebody discloses to them that they are being domestically abused, or they are in danger. What should your volunteers do? We've touched on health and safety, fire, first aid, and so on. And it's very good practice to have a risk assessment of individual activities, individual venues. Sometimes individual people need to be risk assessed if they're coming to do an activity with you, like a walk. You mentioned the walks. If somebody has dementia or something like that, you would need to have done a risk assessment to make sure that somebody's always walking with them, even if they're just nipping to the loo or whatever. And actually working all of that out, as well as the more usual fire, first aid and so on, is really important. Equalities, diversity and inclusion kind of speaks for itself. And the board basics, the code of conduct, the conflict of interest are mandated by the Charity Commission and can result in, breach of this can result in your organisation being what's the word, sacked by the Charity Commission ultimately. And then if you're employing staff, there's the whole bundle of employment law. So if these are the sort of starting points, you'll have others that you will come just under this. Oh yes, the financial procedures. This is an absolute basic one as well. You have to have something in writing about how you do the basics, your insurance cover, petty cash, reserves, and so on. Luckily, you'll be glad to hear that my expert colleague who runs our finances is just tomorrow producing a piece for the Academy on how to do all of this stuff. So that will be coming soon. I hope that will be of interest to you.
Okay.
There is also a marvellous resource from the Charity Commission, which I thoroughly recommend. It's Charity Commission leaflet number 8, and it's a checklist of financial policy, financial procedures. Everything from having 2 people there when you open the envelopes of cash that you so often get these days, right up to signatories and so on. Very, very useful resource. You may, depending on who you are and what you do, have a clear income generation plan. You may have an ethical investment plan if you're an endowed organisation. Quite often, these are summarised into a policy or a procedures manual, or there may just be in a few how-to briefer things. So,
sorry, could you just say a bit more about on the previous one about supplier selection?
Oh yes, this one. Yes, if remember I mentioned the board basics, the conflict of interest.
Yeah.
So there's 2 things here. One is you may build that into your financial procedures, that you will only choose a supplier with no connection to any of the board members, which is a nice and easy thing.
Okay.
or you may have guidelines on if you're commissioning a purchase over a certain amount, then it's got to go to a tender. That's quite usual.
Okay.
Very occasionally, and particularly with local authorities, you might have something where it says your supplier has to show social value, so it has to employ local people and use local resources.
Okay.
In fact, for a smaller organisation, you may very well have and this to some extent comes into the environmental policies. You may have a thing saying we will source our goods and services within 20 miles to reduce the carbon footprint.
Yeah.
I mean, that's relevant, I think, for the allotment. There's not many occasions where we're buying large items. So, for example, with the allotment, we've bought a greenhouse, which we went and looked at various companies online, ended up going to our local garden centre, getting a quote from them, and then putting that back to the trustees for them to all approve that we were to go ahead and buy this greenhouse. So on the whole, the types of things that we might be buying tend to be smaller things, like getting printed copies of our leaflets, that sort of thing. And again, we normally get quotes from a couple of printers. So that's like, but we probably ought to document, is what you're saying, so we need to document that in a policy.
And it may also be worth saying, let's have a procedure whereby we go to free cycle first. People are always giving away greenhouses. They may be crap greenhouses, but on Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree or Free Cycle, you may, before you buy it, you may have a policy to check, can we get it free? And that's without actually putting your hand up and saying, look, we're a registered charity, please give us a greenhouse, nice Mr. Man.
And the fact, so we've got our policies meeting in 2 weeks' time. I think it's 2 weeks today, I think. And so I've started writing some of this down, then I thought, actually, will you be able to let us have all the slides? You will.
Oh,
yes. So basically, I'm just thinking that Vince isn't here, and I know he's in the process of finishing. He's writing up a sort of a draft financial policy in time for 2 weeks' time. So I just want to see whether I'm sure he is aware of these, because he's also treasurer for another charity, but just so he
that just sticks CCOA as an appendix, and you'll find most things. I think there's a bit about suppliers in there actually, but
thank you.
I was thinking about catering as well, when we when we get caterers to do lunches and things, about who we approach for that.
Yeah, okay, that's all.
You could think about starting with not-for-profits. There's some very good not-for-profits around doing catering and things. In fact, we're working with a couple who are trying to get a catering business together. So have a little look at that.
Okay, that's all helpful, thank you.
Good. So the related policies, because if you've got a GDPR policy, which hopefully you will have, you might also want to pull out some of those procedures into a bit more guidance, acceptable use of IT policy, confidentiality of your records. And similarly, if quite a lot of this needs to have a disciplinary policy for volunteers and trustees to deal with any breaches. If somebody deliberately ignores a procedure, you need to have a recourse. And as I've suggested here, the EDI work, it's useful to have a bullying and harassment policy and a grievance procedure. And I've touched on the environmental one. And we are going to be doing some more work around this. It's something that's very dear to DCA's chief executive's heart. And increasingly, funders, particularly National Lottery, presumably because they're being required by government to account for the difference they're making in the environment, they're asking you to have policies and procedures in place about reducing your carbon footprint. And it's quite a challenging area, but worth getting ahead of. So those few simple policies are what I describe as the mandatory policies. So there may be others which, because of what you do specifically, are that you need. But let's look at the, I'll put it somewhere. Yeah, let's look at the how policies and procedures can be used to reduce the risks that you identified earlier. So I'm trying to just think which way of doing this. Yeah, okay, let's go around the room one at a time. And what I want you to do is to pick one of the risks that you identified and say what policy and procedures you think will reduce either the likelihood of it happening or the impact. I'm going to ask you for one each, and then we'll go round and round until we're all completely exhausted. Let's start with you, Carol. Take one of yours and see if you can.
Well, certainly, as you mentioned earlier, safeguarding. And confidentiality, possibly. It may impinge on.
How would you break that down? What do you think? What sort of procedures do you think you're going to need under safeguarding?
Oh, under safeguarding, I think on this specific one, it will be about ensuring we've got up-to-date information about the individuals that we're recommending regarding their governing bodies and insurances and so on.
Yes, I think that's really important.
So we've got a little example on this one, because we have got, you know, there is a therapist that we received some negative feedback about, and that person's insurance document had actually run out. So I've asked now on 3 occasions for them to give me an up-to-date copy of their insurance, which has got no response. So
do you ask them for their safeguarding policies?
No, because they're often, I don't think they're individuals providing, for example, counselling, or and I don't think, I mean, I've worked myself as a therapist as an individual, and I never had any policies in place for myself, so I don't think they're likely to have.
Okay.
But that's
so in which case, what you could do is have a statement, a safeguarding statement that you give to them.
Yes.
Yes.
If they're BCAP registered or something, they have state safeguarding guidance. My daughter's training as a counsellor, so they have to study the ethics, they have to study safeguarding. So what you could do is make sure that what you want of them is congruent with the BCAP guidance on safeguarding they will be familiar with.
Yeah. Appropriate to their whatever governing body they're registered with, because they're the people that would have the strong, robust policies that they have to guide by.
And you need to make sure that things like disclosure is understood, because they have guidance around disclosure of a safeguarding concern. And you have to make sure it's congruent with yours, so that the people you're referring understand that what your guidance may be different from theirs.
Right. Yeah.
So yes, it's a question of having that conversation and making it congruent, I think. Good. Joe, do you have one?
Let's have a look. I mean, the one that I'm very aware of is the difficulties with succession planning and recruitment.
Right.
So in terms of policies,
It's not really a policy, it's more of a plan, isn't it?
mitigate.
But it's also a thing that actually, if you have procedures in place for constantly
Yeah.
putting a recruitment notice out with your AGM papers, or
Right,
quarter it goes on doit.org,
right.
and you have actual procedures.
Yeah, okay, it's a procedure rather than a policy, because I was thinking which policy would that be covered by, but as a procedure, yes, we could write a procedure that includes maybe a 6-monthly
Campaign or something, yeah.
publicity campaign, which would also coincide with the AGM every spring, but then something else in the autumn. And that could include maybe a description of what a trustee's role within the Living Tree is, and what we would hope that they might be able to contribute, and what skills they might be able to bring.
And your policy position as an organisation, because of what the Living Tree does, and we did touch on this last time, is going to be something around lived experience. This organisation believes that we get the richest input in governance if we recruit people who have been affected by cancer as trustees. For instance, it could be that lived experience or affected by or something, to leave the door open ajar, because one day you're going to need somebody with a particular set of skills soon as you can, and you need a little bit of wriggle room.
Yeah, just in case they haven't got any lived experience, but they might be the perfect person for example, somebody.
Although, to be fair, most people have got lived experience of
Yes,
friends.
I know they have, you're right.
You know better than I do.
Yeah, 1 and 2. So yes, so in terms of writing having a procedure, a written procedure that we try to keep that as a constant issue that we regularly return to as a group of trustees, and reminding members that we may, or that we're always keen to hear of anyone who might like to become a trustee. And the same for the volunteers, the same applies to the volunteers.
Absolutely. So I think insofar as it's a policy, that's how far you go. It's the kind of position of recruiting trustees. I mean, you always want people with skills and interest. I mean, there's a whole big course about recruiting trustees for representation and diversity. Every organisation has to make that decision for themselves. But if it's put in a policy document, we want trustees from these groups for these reasons, then you know where you're going. You have that firmness of purpose. So Diane,
thank you.
one of yours.
Well, I guess because I tend to book the speakers for our Friday afternoon meetings, I've been quite involved along with the other trustees, of when we should do Zoom meetings and when it's okay to go back face to face, which has mostly been due to COVID, and obviously the extra vulnerability of our members. Although just recently we decided not to meet face to face and have a Zoom meeting instead because of Storm Eunice.
Exactly.
So I think we've kind of we have had debates in the past between ourselves about how much it's reasonable to say to our members, you know, look, you kind of know the position with regard to COVID, you know, how much do we put it on them to say, you know, you kind of, you know, you have the information that we have, and how much we should be taking a decision about whether we're almost encouraging people to come along face to face still. So that's been a really big thing, of course, over, you know, the past year.
Of course.
And I know Jo has approached Tracy Street at Macmillan to see whether Macmillan have got guidance on this. So I think we've kind of worked our way through it, but it has been, certainly from the point of view of Friday afternoon meetings, it has been a really major thing trying to risk assess, etc.
There's an awful lot in that. I mean, there could be a policy and procedure around arranging meetings. Because I mean, our Rotary has gone to hybrid meetings, so the majority of people will be over lunch, and then if we've got a speaker or if there's a some club business, the rest of us can join over Zoom. And as you said, with 24 hours notice, President Tom made the decision that because of Storm Eunice, we weren't going to meet in person at all, and everybody just went on Zoom. So having some kind of meeting procedures that outlines, we'll have them in person if this, because of that, because social interaction is important. But if somebody can't, for whatever reason, they're isolating because of COVID or other health issues, we will have the opportunity for them to join in insofar as they can via Zoom or something. And it is this organisation's policy that, you know, even a Zoom call is something or whatever.
Yeah.
The second one you said was the health and safety and the risk assessment of the individual events. And those procedures we've touched on in terms of operational planning and having actual procedures. Usually it's I'm sure you've got one, a little risk assessment, and somebody will fill in for a venue or for an event.
Yeah.
What often gets missed off the procedures is what happens then. Where does that go? And where does that folder go, and who looks out for it, and who monitors that, and whether that's worked? I mean, usually organisations will review their policies and procedures if there's an incident, but most don't review it if there's a near miss. I ran some older people's clubs for a while that we had the health and safety policies for people going on minibuses, and it wasn't until somebody dropped off the end of a tailgate that was in the air, somebody in a wheelchair, that actually they said, oh yes, you know, that's nearly happened loads of times. And I'm like, somebody could have mentioned this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they survived, incidentally, that person. So yes, that having a procedure. I mean, most of this we're talking about procedures, although because they're at the heart of what you do, there is a little policy statement there at the beginning of each one saying this organisation believes that this is a great idea because. So, Jo, do another one.
Right. Okay. Let's have a look. So the insurance for the allotment, I mean, that would obviously come under the financial policies, which we would need to break down in much more detail. But I suppose, do we have a threshold above which we agree that something large should be insured and that we should consider paying a bigger dividend for a more inclusive policy? I don't know. I mean, is that something that you do on an individual basis as each item crops up, which won't be that often? Or should we have a policy which states how we approach our business of insurance? I'm saying this slightly aware that the trustee who can't, one of the trustees who isn't here, Peter Green, he's the trustee who was one of the very early members and now lives in Sussex, and he's a retired insurance broker. He does our insurance for us, and we're very grateful to him. So anything insurance, we send it to him and he sorts it out for us. He doesn't really do Zoom, so he hasn't managed to join in with any of these sessions, but he was instrumental in sort of helping us to see that actually there probably wasn't any point in changing our insurance policy just for the benefit of insuring one particular item which may not need any more money spent on it. I don't know.
Well,
that's quite a specific example. Yes.
One is, yes, I think you're right. If you have a probably in your financial articles or manual, a thing that says if something is valued at over £500, it must be insured individually, because if we lost it, we wouldn't be able to just replace it. And you could really think about it in terms of what would the implications be if you did lose it. If somebody came and smashed it to pieces one night, what would the implications for the organisation be? And if it's an inconvenience, then that's one thing. If it would completely derail your horticultural therapy classes, then that's another thing. Sorry, I've got a cousin who's a horticultural therapist, but and so you have to work out how important it is. The other thing is thinking about the reserves. If you've got money put aside, as you would need to anyway, because these things in the fullness of time need replacing, as with any capital purchase, you would probably depreciate that over 3 years. So if you as an organisation have said, well, we have over 3 years, if it's longer than 3 years, we've got the money to replace it in the bank. So that would reduce the risk. So it really, so you have your reserves policy, and you would have your capital depreciation, I suppose, procedures.
Okay.
But all based on risk and how important it is to your organisation.
And I know that our treasurer has got a very good grasp of that, as well as this other gentleman.
I'm sure.
Yes, I think.
I mean, when I'm saying any of this, I'm not assuming that you haven't already thought of it. I'm kind of belt and braces a bit.
Yeah.
And it's more about this process that we're going through.
Yeah.
So Carol, you have another one.
Oh, I haven't really, only the general ones that Joe and Diane have been thinking about around the whole organisation. I've just been jotting down notes about, my head's now starting to think, well, we need a therapy partnership policy. We're possibly embedding some procedures into that as well. So I've been jotting down ideas and headings for that. But yeah, I think as Joe started out, the succession plan is probably one of the most urgent things we need to be better planned for.
Yeah, and that's about what we were just discussing about making sure you're constantly on the lookout for trustees and so on. In your operations planning, what are we going to do over the next year or so? You might choose to put a big push together for a vice chair, or for more trustees with a view to becoming chair in 3 years' time or whatever. But that's sort of the operations side. Your policy and your procedures are that it's a good thing to have a full complement of trustees to get that breadth of experience and knowledge and enthusiasm, and that you as a trustee board will keep on that constantly. Diane, do you have any others particularly you want to
well, I guess the other one, I think we might have mentioned it last time actually, and that is things like people getting injured on rambles, and we did have somebody on one of our walks who fell and or slipped and badly fractured his ankle. And we did, following that, the person, she's not a trustee, but she does lead the walks. She did kind of make some suggestions. I can't remember what they all are now.
They'll be
but I
written
think
down somewhere, I expect.
yes, it included things like people coming on the walks having, I can't remember details of name, sort of name, address, information like that.
A contact person if there's an injury. And
Yes.
so because Rita, who is that, she was a trustee until a year ago, and she's run the Ambling group for quite a few years now. She's a retired nurse. She does do a very thorough risk assessment before each amble that she organises, but I think she was quite very conscious of the huge responsibilities when that happened, because it was the first time, wasn't it, that anyone had an injury on a walk, really. So she did, and I know somewhere I've got an email with what her suggestions were, but I think one of them, Diane, as you say, was about ensuring that she has the details and phone number of someone to contact if someone is poorly, unwell.
Yeah, you'd probably also need consent on the sign-up sheet for contacting the relative and things like that. Yes, having a sign-up sheet and getting that filled in every time is a great idea.
Yeah.
You'd also want to have a way, depending on, I suppose, the level of the ramble, of ensuring that people had some guidance prior to that, so they didn't come in trainers or slippers or flip-flops or whatever.
Yes.
Sorry, she tends to say, doesn't she, whether it's an easy one or a more difficult
and whether
one.
to wear wet weather gear and whether it's going to be muddy.
Yeah.
There's very few, I gather, that can actually be done in flip-flops, but
Yeah.
people consistently try. I mean, there was a thing, when we had that fine weather and the World and his wife went up the Welsh mountains during COVID.
Yeah.
And part of the annoyance of the rescue people was that people were doing it in flip-flops and unsuitable gear, and just they kept having to rescue people who shouldn't have been there.
I know. We did a walk up Ben Lomond about 4 or 5 years ago on a really sunny, warm summer's day, and I got my proper walking gear, and my kids were, we were all dressed appropriately, proper walking boots and flasks of water, and I took it fairly slowly because I got out of breath every now and then, and my family were racing up ahead of me. Lots of slippery, and we got to the top, and there were people up there in t-shirts just having cups of tea. We overtook one guy that went past us drinking a can of beer as he walked up, and his sort of trainers, and we were just kind of like the cross section of humanity that was up there. Not taking
Yes.
it all seriously was incredible. Yeah.
Knowing about that if the mist had come in, is it even on a summer's day?
Yeah. But yeah, so you're quite right, and I know Diane, Rita does pretty much cover that, but you're right, Dan, we should just look again at what her suggestions were
In a procedure.
Yeah.
I mean, because one of the things about this is that, going back to the point we were making earlier, that if Rita suddenly went away on a family responsibility, who would know what the procedures were, where the forms were, and what happened to the forms?
Yes.
Because quite a lot of the things that policies and procedures then lead on to
Yes.
is this kind of business continuity plans. Because if you put all your procedures in a folder somewhere, preferably off-site if the place burns down, then somebody can pick up a lot of it, not all of it, but some of it. And there is more to business continuity planning than that, but it's a good start. I mean, I did a training once, not around policies and procedures, but sort of more generally. And I said, if the aliens came down and abducted your CEO and your chair, forgive me if you've heard this, who would know the important stuff and what to do?
Yeah. And
there was silence in the room, and somebody at the back stuck their hand up and said, is the answer the aliens? Yes, I mean, in our case, it's our secretary who is amazing. She's not a trustee.
Oh, yeah.
So I know she is keeping files and copies on her, but again, all of that needs to be available. And I think we have already discussed and just not done it yet about having a separate paper
office manual.
Yeah, this is it. So there's an awful lot of work to do.
What would happen if the aliens came down and abducted Rose?
Well, then we would be stuck. Then we would be stuck. That's right. That's the trouble.
Yes, one of my previous chairs where I used to work was involved in a community group, and shall we say the aliens abducted their appointment secretary. And she was not the best woman with paperwork, shall we say. And my friend inherited this system, which was a whole random bit of post-its, a book with lots of crossings out, and not the least idea of what was booked in when, or whether they'd been charged for it, and all of these rooms bookings.
Oh dear.
So yes, if it's any consolation, we are in the process of developing some templates for things like business continuity planning, some of the policies, and so on. But I'll talk a bit more in a moment about how to get templates you can work with.
Okay.
So is this beginning to make sense in terms of managing those risks?
Yes, I mean, the only other one I've got here is poor knowledge of trustee responsibilities, which was under compliance. So again, that would have to come under the same one that we've talked about earlier, which is having a procedure about not only recruiting trustees, but about training of trustees.
Yes, well, it's a separate one. Having a training and development policy for trustees, because of what you just said, it is important. Might even come under compliance, actually.
Yeah.
And actually breaking that down as to your having a trustee audit on a regular basis, your induction, trying to find time to do training with trustees, although I'm here, you're doing well. Tick G, as my sister would say. And having that written down and why you want to do it is really strong in terms of nailing your standard to the mast.
Okay, thank you.
So you can now go on and as you will come back at the end to that whole question of making a risk management policy and how the policies and procedures flow on from that. But let's look at that, the actual implementation process. Share again. Yay, can you see that?
Yep.
Good.
Yep. Lovely.
Okay, I would argue, and this is nicked from a number of eminent places, that these are the 5 steps. And we've talked a bit about well, various bits of this, but I want to put it all together. So the first step we did touch on is you've got to understand the legal context. Now, thankfully, you don't have to go out and find the legal context. There's plenty of templates and sites that interpret for you what you need to know about GDPR or whatever. But for example, I've got a couple of examples here on the I don't know which way around it is for you, but the one that says read all. That's for the health and safety executive. And if you've got, I think, 5 or more employees, or if you're self-employed, this sort of applies to you. And it's very, very complicated. And I must admit, I was with a little bit of malice aforethought. I gave you the beginning of the specified injuries to workers list, which covers pages and pages. It's utterly specific. So you don't need to be reading through all of this. But what you do need to do is go to the health and safety executive and get their advice when you're making your health and safety policy. Similarly, on the other side, there's a number of bits of legislation that come into your safeguarding work. And it overlaps with things like data protection. And in fact, it overlaps with your EDI work as well. So hugely legislated area. So you need to make sure that you do understand the legal context, what is being required of you. And then step 2 is actually, hang on, I've got a better version of this. I've done all that. Where are we? Yeah. Yes, here we go. Sorry. Understand the legal context. These are the common ones that I've mentioned already, the health and safety and so on. Make a decision on what you believe. So it may be values led, depending on the mission of your organization, or relate to your strategic or operational objectives or strategy. If you hear snoring, it's not me, it's the cat. I gave up in the end because she spent so much time on my keyboard. I put one of her cat beds in the corner, but she doesn't have to snore. So it may also be really professional. What you believe is that people should be compassionate, professional, whatever, or the mandated by law that we spoke of. And this is the first place of many where I say, be careful if you're going to adopt a template, because this is the bit that needs almost the most fine tuning for your organization, because it may seem fine, like the one on that says is committed to encourage equality, diversity, inclusion. That may seem absolutely tickety-boo, exactly what you think. But the other side starts off as saying, okay, it's a policy where the management can, if they choose, look at emails. So it's part of our effective use of IT policy, perhaps. But then you go down a bit, and actually it says the management wants to ensure that its employees consistently hit their respective targets. And actually that's not what you want to say at all. So be really careful if you adopt a template at this sort of point. Having decided your stance, then you have to design your procedures. Some of these you can nick, some of these you can't. And who's going to be responsible? This is one of the most important things you need to think about. And I know with you, it's slightly difficult because there's a quite limited pool of trustees to make responsible for things. But somebody has to be responsible. We'll look at this again in a moment. But is somebody responsible on the ground on the day for the walk, for the Friday meeting? What do they need to do? What paperwork do they need to do? If something happens, who do they need to tell? Like we were just saying about next of kin. And also it's useful with the procedure to say what are the consequences of not doing it. Not so much to put the frighteners on, but just to be really, really clear as to why you're doing it and what happens if you don't. And then this quite often gets written up. And I've mentioned that you can have this as one document or two. And they can be done separately like this, with your policy statements being publicly available and your procedures not. And it's whatever works for you. Most of the ones you'll see and be able to nick will be a single document, which is a little bit why I'm saying be a bit careful. So this is where the trustee board comes in, as if you hadn't already. You have to agree the policies and technically note the procedures, but for your organisation, because you're all hands-on, you would agree the whole document. And then somebody else is delegated to go away and keep an eye on this, make sure the implementation goes smoothly and that things are monitored. And that every 1 or 2 years it's updated, or if the legislation changes, or especially after an incident. And then if it comes back to the trustee board, you would note in the minutes any substantial changes. And I've said here that this is best done on a rolling basis. Depending on what you do, you might have anywhere up to 50 policies and procedures. And you do nothing else as a trustee board if all you did was read through and agree them, even if you just did a few each time you're meeting. So there's several ways to do this. One is the having a subcommittee or several subcommittees. If you've got a little subgroup of people who are leading on the finances, for example, they could review all the finances once and just bring recommendations back to the full board meeting. If not, another common one would be the HR or people subcommittee. And the good advantage of subcommittees, we were talking about delegating, is that they can include lay members, more bodies to delegate things to. And it can be a really good way. Did we talk about this last time? It can be a really good way of involving people who don't want to be trustees, but they can be involved in the management of quite a high level stuff through devising these policies. And that could be a subcommittee or a working party that meets regularly. You could have a policies working party and try and find a couple of enthusiastic volunteers who absolutely love policies. Good luck with that one. Or it could be that once a year, this group meets, goes through everything. Or you can have one or two people who just go away and do it. The best case scenario is that at every trustee board meeting, you get 3 recommendations of just renewing policies, and 1 where you're told about substantial changes because the law has changed. That's the ideal scenario, and that this is handed to you by a subcommittee with good terms of reference, that you understand and they understand what they can and can't make a decision on. This is the Charity Commission's guidance, which we've looked at, but this is it in slightly more detail. And the important thing here is this will help you to understand common themes, risks and gaps in the organisation and the way it operates. Okay. So a bit more on the actual implementation. We've talked about you have a policy stance. Your procedures will be day-to-day actions. You may also have administrative requirements, crisis management, who has to know and how to record it, crucially. And you now need to tell people. And it all starts with the paperwork. You need a folder of forms. Those forms need to have a home, somebody who looks after them and loves them, and more importantly, reports back to you guys about them. You need to understand where you're going to file these, thinking about the data protection, particularly if your, say, for example, your sign-up sheet for the walking groups, if it's got a little box for any medical conditions that we should know about, that has to be kept under GDPR policies, because that could be very sensitive data. You then have to think about, does this change your existing systems? I mean, the ideal is a sort of tabula rasa approach where you're just reinventing everything from scratch. But that is very rarely the case. So you're thinking about what's changing, how are we augmenting or changing the systems we currently have. And whose job is it to ensure that this change takes place? And then what isn't down here, you've got a little bit of organisational change management as well. If somebody's exceedingly wedded to the one system and you're saying, actually, we need another system, you have to manage that change for that person or that team. Sometimes big changes, I mean, GDPR was a good example. Actually, suddenly one needed a data information officer. And actually, that changed somebody's role description. And whether that's a paid role or a volunteer role is immaterial, really. It's got to be, somebody has to have responsibility for it. And because of that, they may need training, or everybody might need training. And it could be that as you were talking about your greetings pack, as you decide on policies to change things or bring things into awareness, that might change your greetings pack. And if you want to include a little, have you thought about being a trustee or whatever? Or these are the guidelines for coming on one of our walks. Then you have to update things. You may actually want to include for your training or awareness, new areas. And then there's the practical stuff about, this is where you file the form, this is how you fill it in, this is how to get that information if somebody has reduced mental capacity or whatever. And again, you have to repeat that, particularly things like safeguarding, because when nothing happens, people start taking corners, start cutting corners and not filling things in correctly and so on. Which, if something then happens, if somebody then falls off the back of your minibus, is a really, really big deal. So ideally head that off at the past. And for the leads, you may want specialist training. Everybody went on GDPR training, and it's useful as your organisation grows and develops, perhaps to have a safeguarding lead who goes on the trainings, watches the webinars and things. And it could be that actually what you're proposing is a fundamental change to how you do business, and I'll come back to that again in a moment. The most important thing is to monitor, and I know that's time consuming, and once you've said to everybody, here's the folder, these are the forms, get on with it, you may not have time to revisit that, but it's always worth monitoring. Do they do what they're intended to do? Have they minimized the risk that you wanted to minimize? And are people walking the talk? Are they showing the effects of the training, that they're doing it right, they're reducing the risk? So you as a trustee board have to revisit this. Now this is quite a nice graphic that I came across, because the only policies that the Charity Commission actually goes into in detail are safeguarding and risk management, helpfully, which or unhelpfully. But actually this one is quite generalizable. Going from the top, the purple box, to the other side, it says you have your policies and procedures and any codes of conduct or associated policies in place, and you regularly review and update those. They've got it backwards actually, because then they say identify the risks, and I would argue always do the risks first. You then think in the red box about how to embed this, how really to, it says, consider how to improve the safeguarding culture within your charity. So if you're thinking about getting people involved with subcommittees or at trustee board level, whether you're thinking about safeguarding, whether you're thinking about everybody being much more aware of health and safety issues, has it become the way we do business? Has it been embedded in the culture of your organisation? And does everybody in the organisation, no matter what they do, understand how to respond to a problem? In this case, safeguarding, but if it was a, oh, my brain's dried up. If it was a potential health and safety problem, if they saw that somebody was wearing flip-flops on a walk, does everybody know what they need to do? And who they need to tell, how to raise that or even escalate that. If somebody saw an inappropriate relationship developing, would they know how to raise that concern properly? Then going back down to the bottom, you have the training, but you regularly evaluate the training. And as I've mentioned in the green box, that you look at the posts. Have they changed? Have they got new responsibilities? Back to risk. And then the brown box is review, review, review. And that last box hopefully doesn't apply about working overseas. But I can spin this. it also means that you should look at, if you're working with other organisations or like the therapists, what are their safeguarding or risk or health and safety provisions, and are they congruent with your own? I like that. That's a good model. So, possibly the most useful slide. Some of the places you can get either information or that thing I was mentioning about it breaks it down for you, so you don't have to. The NSPCC is very good on that. It says these are the bits of legislation you need to apply here. This is what you need to do with them. I also found a very good Brighton and Hove charity that seems to have all the example policies, absolutely good, great ones. I mentioned the Health and Safety Executive, and I've also put the Information Commissioner's Office. They're actually surprisingly readable, the ICO, and that's all the GDPR stuff. And they have some really good things on their site where you work through the ifs and thens for your organisation, and they've got some sort of live, and they'll say, actually, you don't need an information officer, you need a leaflet or something like that. And they're surprisingly readable, I think. Now, there's a few of those which are paid for, but that doesn't mean I'm recommending them. I just know the Directorate of Social Change as a really good, effective organisation. So I will send all this on. So that is all I've got on that. Any questions?
Feels overwhelming just in terms of, you know, getting this all done, but I suppose all we can do is, having just recently become a charity, and obviously COVID stopped us from doing a lot for the first couple of years, is start to prioritize, I suppose, in the next 6 months, which things we want to, which are the urgent policies. I think we've got a policies meeting in 2 weeks' time. I think a lot of the policies that we've already got in place are ones which Rose, our secretary, and Rita, this ex-trustee, retired nurse, and myself have already looked at and used the Charity Commission website, and I think possibly also yourselves, the DCA. There are some templates which I think we've already adapted. So gone through, yes, and so I think we do have policies. A lot of them are there, but I think just, looking today at how to break them down into much more detail, and particularly the safeguarding and the reviewing and the having subcommittees to update them. I think this is all stuff that we're just going to have to work out. How do we do this? Who's going to do this?
Yeah.
I
mean, so long as you have got those big 5 or 6 things, which from the sounds of it, you are the GDPR, the finances, the health and safety, you've got risk management started, safeguarding, and EDI. So long as you've got those, you're going to be fine, and you can build up the rest later. I mean, what I would suggest, I was going to do it as an exercise, but it's getting late in the afternoon, and we're slightly running out of time, so I'll do it as a suggestion.
Okay.
If you write up, if you pull together all of the bits that you three have identified as risks, and the colleagues who aren't with us have identified as areas of risk, And one person perhaps puts those all into the little chart I sent you. And then at your policies meeting, there'll probably be around a dozen of those. You, as you say, prioritize, and you've got the mandatory list to go on. But prioritize perhaps 3 chunks. First, the mandatory ones. Secondly, the ones that you feel you really need, the sort of secondary ones that you do need to have in place. So the trustee one, and some of the others we've spoken of, maybe the insurance one. And then underneath that is the final third, would be the ones that you want to develop over the next year, 18 months.
Yeah.
So that have 3 chunks, and then that will bring it down to a manageable size.
Yes.
And then, because for each one you've got to think about implementation time, and I would strongly suggest that rather than all the trustees do everything, maybe Rita, maybe your secretary, and one of the trustees, and then haul in whoever's got a pulse, do a subcommittee and get that set up in the near future, because you've got a lot as a trustee board to be working through. Actually, the detail of this sort of level probably, or have it, you remember we spoke about splitting the meetings? In the bottom half of the meeting, the ops part of the meeting, rather than the governance strategy end. And the final suggestion would be very much around getting extra help. So 3 ways of doing it. You train up the people you've got, or inveigle them into coming and doing a bit more. You get more hands on deck, or get a consultant like DCA or something to come and help, if only by reading through policies you've drafted. And I suppose the final way would be to pay somebody to do it for you, if there's a particular policy or a couple of policies that you really think need to be done with a full knowledge of legislation or risk procedures or whatever. You have to be realistic about what you as a trustee board can manage in terms of knowledge, experience, and capacity. I know you haven't got vast amounts to go and hire consultants willy-nilly, but
And on that note, Cara, does DCA, it does read through drafts of our own policies? We presumably we'd pay a fee for that, would we?
If you can make the case that COVID has affected your organisation, which I think you can, no.
Okay.
We've got a little bit of funding for Julie to do things like that, but please don't extract the Michael and send her 14 very long policies.
Okay. So if we sort of, I mean, COVID obviously did mean that for the first 2 years of being a charity, we've just, well, first 18 months at least, we were just literally treading water with Zoom meetings and trying to keep in touch with people, and not really able to meet as a board of trustees other than to decide, you know, what are we going to try and do next week. It was those kind of practical operational things that we were focusing on, rather than longer term strategy. So if we can sort of say that COVID delayed us beginning to look at strategy,
come in under that funding, that'll be fine.
and who would we contact? Would we contact you?
Contact me and I'll put it through to Julie, or if you know Julie.
I don't, but send to Julie.
I can by me. Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that is helpful to know. We'll, you know, at our next policies meeting in 2 weeks' time, we'll hopefully come away from that with a clear idea of what our priorities are. And then if we feel, because Rose, who is our secretary, is amazing, She puts in a lot of her spare time. She's also secretary and a trustee for Stepping Out, the sort of partner exercise charity. So she does an awful lot of work, and if there's any just practical help in reading through them, I didn't realise that that was possible, but we may well get back to you on that.
That's absolutely fine. I mean, so
Okay.
long as you now know how to critique any template you can find on Google or wherever, or one of those websites,
Yeah.
then I'm happy. You have my full permission to go away and nick away the policies. Between you, you can adapt them properly, because nothing worse than one that
Yeah.
I've seen them, you know, organisations sent them to us, and they so clearly haven't thought about it, because the other organisation's name is still all the way to the document. You know,
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes, and it's relevant at all. Yes, that's right. Yeah, no, I think we've tried very hard to make sure we haven't done that.
thinking is good. Plagiarising is not good.
Um,
So I'll send you these slides. On the subject of risk, if you run into any trouble with making that list to start you with the prioritization, then come back to me,
Okay.
because I'd be quite happy to help with that.
That's very kind. Okay. Thank
And
you.
if you need any more help when you get to the stage of making a full organizational risk plan.
Mm.
And I suppose my other thoughts would be that as and when, from the sounds of it, I think you're going to grow like a weed over the next
Like a
few
tree.
years.
A baby.
And much faster. So if at any point you want to come back for something a bit more strategic,
Yeah.
operations planning, the Academy is going to be launching on the 4th of May.
Okay.
And so I thoroughly recommend that you, because a lot of what we discussed, and I said, oh yes, I'm doing a bit on that, or I've done something on that. All of that will be there, for a lot of it free and for paid. If anybody's got time to become a guinea pig, you can come and see some of it now, because we're needing testers for our learning management system. So
Okay.
and the other way we've spoken of is the Trustees Breakfast Club, where we're keeping people updated with what's available.
Yes.
And I know that various ones of you have been to the networking meetings, the monthly networking meetings
Yeah.
as well.
Yes, and we get your newsletter, which we share out amongst us, each other, and
Doing taster sessions on things. I'm going to carry on doing those for the next 6 months at least, which is a free half hour. I mean, in fact, one of the ones I've just shown you was a taster I did the other day. So
and if say in 6 months' time we get to a point where we just feel we need some specific help again, it would be appropriate to get back to DCA, either to yourself directly or via generic.
just know me. That's absolutely fine. You're one of mine now. Well, that's
your wing. That's lovely. Because it's just a shame, as I say, that I think Alison was just realizing that she'd already got this other commitment, she couldn't come today, and Vince decided had to go to a funeral. But I know we all found it really helpful last time, and I don't think we'll ever be able to get Peter to join in, sadly, because he just doesn't like doing Zoom. But we'll share all of this with him, and if it means getting 5 of us together another time, it is a really good use of hopefully your time, because you can be specific and focused, and it helps us all learn and ask questions at the same time. So I think it's a really nice way for us to
I love it. I mean, I've enjoyed working with you, and as I said, I did the training, the slides you've just seen with as a taster session, and it's far more interesting going, oh, and yeah, this applies to the walks, and it's far more interesting for me. So
yeah, it brings it alive, really, doesn't it? So
yes, very much so.
Yeah, it's been really helpful. I think probably I'm going to need to go on a quick walk now and let my brain assimilate it all.
That was we've actually got another quarter of an hour, although I'll spend
Yeah.
that sort of sorting
Yeah.
it out.
Just a quick question. Can I have
Yeah.
a quick question? It might be more aimed at Joe, but Carol, you might be able to help as well. Thinking about the therapy partnership policy and possible procedures and who could help us on that, I thought, what about I could ask Michelle? Joe knows who I mean.
Yeah, so yeah,
She's been very high up in her organisation, hasn't she?
there's a lady who's recently joined us. She's only recently moved to Bridport, and she's very quickly become one of our therapists, who's a highly qualified hypnotherapist who's very high up within her own professional body, and I'm sure will be aware of all of the managerial and governance issues. So yeah, we could.
It wouldn't be a conflict of interest asking her if she's no. Excellent.
No, I don't think so. So
Well, it's about getting. I guess she's a volunteer, and we're just asking her to sort of bring some of her other skills to the Living Tree.
had she thought about joining a trustee board? No.
Yeah, we could ask. Yeah, good point.
Well, I could,
Yeah.
surreptitiously.
That's got to be on the end of all of your conversations now.
Yeah.
And would you like to be a trustee?
Well, then do suss people out before you ask.
Yeah.
Had
Yeah.
a situation just recently with the charity where one of their volunteers who helped at the activities their organisation did said, "Oh, would you consider me to be a trustee?" And they went, yes. And then they just this appalling background, because people can't be trustees if they've been convicted for financial mismanagement, fraud, covering up fraud, terrorism, and a couple of other things.
Bankruptcy, one of them.
That kind of thing.
They relaxed that, didn't they?
Oh,
I think it's bankruptcy if there's been financial fraud or mismanagement, but because it used to be you couldn't do anything if you were bankrupt. You couldn't join the armed forces or do absolutely be an MP, which is ironic.
Yeah.
But because the bankruptcy laws were then reframed to help people who were in financial difficulty, I think they then changed that, but don't quote me on that bit. So
Yeah.
burning questions. Actually, I better ought to stop the recording, really, oughtn't I? We're just gabbing.